Back live tonight here on In Focus. The EFF urges the ANC-led government to cut off diplomatic ties with Israel amid the ongoing war with the Islamic resistance movement Hamas in Gaza. Red Berets sponsored the motion in Parliament. They've recently protested outside the Israeli embassy in Pretoria to show solidarity with the people of Palestine. For more on this conversation, joined now by international relations expert Thembisa Fakude. Mr. Fakude, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on tonight. I mean, we've seen, in the past, some popular anti-apartheid boycotts that would have lasted for years. For example, ordinary Europeans pressuring supermarkets to stop selling South African products, British students forcing banks to pull out of particular countries which are apartheid states. We've seen folks in Dublin, for example, saying no, workers must not drink these products because they are products from South Africa. So this kind of pressure would have led to a lot of attention being given to South Africa, a lot of pressure being put on the South African government, and eventually leading to what would say where we are now in a democratic dispensation. Do you think this type of pressure will work, especially coming from South Africa in the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Yeah, I think the BDS campaign is not only confined to South Africa. It's a global campaign which has started way before this conflict. And it has had impact because, as you know, the Palestinians have continued suffering from 2007 after Hamas was elected into power. So Israel is continually, particularly in Gaza, oppressed and suppressed freedom of movement and other basic human rights and services to the Palestinians, including the West Bank. So the BDS campaign started around the time, but it started in earnest actually in 2001 after the Durban conference, which was the anti-racism conference that took place in South Africa. So it's not confined to South Africa, but we've seen it getting momentum. South Africa, for example, particularly in Cape Town, there's been actions, at least from the past weekend, where people are protesting outside Cape Union Mart, they're protesting outside Woolworths, and other places that stock Israeli products, including companies that have in the past openly said that they are supporting Israel. So it is continuing, and I think it's going to gain momentum as long as we continue seeing the pictures that we see on television of women and children being killed and bombarded, and the collective punishment that we see at the moment carried out in Gaza.
Yeah. So I've seen some comments on it, others saying, well, cutting ties with Israel is likely going to hurt South Africa in more ways than one, maybe not only economically, but, for example, things like apparently there are products that are used by the SAPS in terms of trucks with water cannons. There's uniforms that are coming from there. There's a whole lot of issues, aeroplanes and so on and so forth, that could be supplied by companies that are in Israel. Are those likely going to be impacted by an Israel boycott?
I think so. I think they are likely to be impacted. But again, I think they will try and seek alternatives. We need to prepare ourselves that there's going to be an element of suffering when this is effected in earnest. I don't think there's going to be a blanket boycott of Israeli products. I think what the activists are going to try and do, they're going to target the low-hanging. I think to expect the South African police services to suspend their import of Israeli products will be difficult, but it doesn't mean that the activists won't stop putting pressure on SAPS to stop dealing with Israel, because this is a blanket campaign which was given motivation by the continual atrocities that we see in Gaza. So this is steam ahead. I think it's going to impact greatly on the business that South Africa is doing with Israel. And I think many people are saying they will cross the bridge when they get to it in terms of what the boycott will do in terms of our economy, in terms of certain services that are essential. They will negotiate that once they reach that point. But for now, I think there is consensus, not only within the pro-Palestinian groupings in South Africa, but within the South African community in general, that Israel deserves to be punished for the atrocities and crimes that it continues to commit in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, others are saying without the support of the West, it would be very difficult to force the hand of Israel. Big politicians and big businesses in America would not be in favor, for example, of financial sanctions and divestment in Israel.
Yeah, of course, indeed, they're not going to be. America is one. Israel is the largest recipient of American aid. So America has come out quite openly. Joe Biden has said, of course, that he supports Israel, and Israel will always be the number one ally of the United States. And we've seen other European countries saying the same. We were all shocked and surprised when Emmanuel Macron came up with a different statement, basically saying we cannot continue with the violations of basic human rights in Israel, mainly condemning and criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu for continuing to bombard Gaza. So he is one of the first who has come out to condemn what's happening in Gaza. But generally, I think most European and Western governments are in support of Israel, and of course they'll do whatever it takes for them to suppress BDS campaigns and to suppress anything that is got to do with calling for sanction and boycott of Israeli goods.
Yeah. I was reading somewhere where some analysis was saying there is a significant shift in attitudes, particularly in younger members of Congress around this anti-apartheid activism. How much traction is that gaining?
I think it's gaining traction. But what I've seen in this conflict, the latest one, there's been a lot of other conflicts or attack on Gaza, but this latest one, we've seen also Jewish people supporting the Palestinian cause and also calling for punishment of Benjamin Netanyahu. And again, this is meant to stop Benjamin Netanyahu from continuing bombarding Gaza. So you have people from across religious lines joining in terms of condemning what's happening and trying to stop Benjamin Netanyahu. I think at the moment there are multi-tracks that are aimed at stopping or encouraging ceasefire, and one of them is this one. And this is gaining momentum, of course, from various groupings across the world, because they feel that if you suppress and you start hitting them in the pocket, that is the Israelis, chances are they'll start listening and they might just change their attitude towards the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah. Israel and its supporters are continuing to claim that those who are, for example, making similarities between the South African racist system and the Israeli apartheid regime are anti-Semitic. Are people continuing, to be sympathetic towards that call?
Well, first of all, let us correct this anti-Semitism. Palestinians are Semites. So for Israelis to say anyone who's against Israel is anti-Semitic, it's actually a misnomer, because the Palestinians are Semite, including most Arab countries or most Arabs within the Arab world. That's the first point. The second point is that there are a lot of similarities. I've argued in the past because I've spent enough time in both territories, Palestine 67 and Palestine 48, others call it Israel. So I know exactly what's going on there. And at the same time, I've lived in South Africa, particularly I've lived in Soweto. We've had a lot of people who supported the PAC and the ANC in the past who used to come to this country, commit certain acts of what was then known as a crime against the state. But we never had a situation where there was collective punishment, where we had F-16 coming and bombing us in the townships. So what's happening in Israel is actually Western apartheid. I know I've been criticized in the past for saying that. But having lived in both places, I've spent enough time to know. And I've been to Palestine, Israel, and everywhere else in between. So I understand and know the politics fairly well. And having, grown up in the townships of one being Soweto, I know exactly the similarities. And I don't think you can begin to compare what's going on there. I've met people, for example, in camps in Bethlehem, one camp called the Heisha camp, where 14-year-old, 15-year-old have never seen a tree because they're in this camp with concrete floors and they've never been out of the camp. I've seen mothers using sewage water to mix the milk powder for their kids because there's no water. So that kind of collective punishment, we've never had it in the township. Different number plates for cars. Some cars can't drive in certain roads, and if they do, they risk being targets for snipers. We never had that. We could still drive to Johannesburg from Soweto. So there are a lot of actions in Israel that are uniquely Israeli and very, very evil in nature, and you can't compare them to what happened in Soweto. But again, the international BDS campaign and other pro-Palestinian activists have since deemed it fit that they'll call what's happening in Israel apartheid, and I think it has resonated, and it is hurting many Israelis because none of them want to be associated with a state that was deemed as against international law and human rights. So the word apartheid, in absence of anything else or any definition, I think it resonates, and it does hurt the Israelis most, and this is why most of them are pushing back on the term.
Yeah. It's been, as you bring up BDS, it's been argued in other sectors that the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, because it's not led by political leaders but by civil society, might not have the kind of same standing in the kind of international forums, for example, where the likes of the ANC might have some kind of leverage.
Well, the ANC at the time when it led the boycott was a civil society. It was not a political party, but largely civil society. And they managed to somehow form organizations that were tailor-made to deal with issues of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So I think this is one of those. So it's not unique. It has happened in the past, notwithstanding, of course, that ANC led the sanctions against apartheid South Africa, and this time around you have the civil society much more well-organized, by the way, one will argue, compared to how the ANC was formed in terms of this particular campaign. The current BDS campaign against Israel, I will argue that it's much, much more organized. And it's also facilitated by the internet. It becomes much more easier for people to coordinate, speak, have campaigns on a very same day. We see, for example, thousands of people marching. That in itself gives some sort of motivation for other campaigners to do so. So the internet has, to an extent, facilitated the spread and promotion of this campaign, and I'll argue that it has been always going to be much more effective than what the ANC campaign or the anti-apartheid and sanctions campaign against the state of South Africa in the past was able to achieve.
Thembisa Fakude, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for your time and coming on tonight. International relations expert there, Thembisa Fakude.